Oh, well, welcome. Liam Johnson has we'll regress a little bit in age. We talk about age, young men speaking. So we're regressing a little bit, but before we go. So Liam, appreciate Liam coming and speaking today to us.
Glad someone still thinks I'm young. As if I'm basically half the age of the next youngest here. Except that Hannah's in here now. Okay, so there is someone younger. Good. You have kids who are adults here. So you have kids who are adults here. That is when you start to be old. Hate to break it to you. Actually being old is when you have grandkids in the adult class. So, yes, I'm Liam Johnson. I'm from Pine Grove. What else is there to say?
You're my son-in-law. You have a lot of
It's true. I am married.
son of Vera and Susan.
That's true.
Grandson of Miriam.
Yes. Who, rumor has it, was going to be here, but I don't know. If Miriam wasn't feeling up to it. Okay. And I have a lot to get through, so we are going to just jump right into it. What does the Bible actually say about tithing? First of all, my background on the topic was always Craig Wagner's sermon, which was before my time. I don't know when it was specifically, but I know I don't remember it, so I could have been 2, I could have been not born yet. I don't actually know. Yeah. Cheerful giving, clapping to be excited about giving before the plates come around. And from my parents specifically, I learned to tithe, putting in 1/10 of my paycheck into the offering plate. And I did do that for a while, and I haven't recently. And I'm going to try to explain why. And if you couldn't gather from that bare bones description of what I know of tithing, the topic is often taught in either a simplistic way or just not taught in any clear terms at all. Like I said, I was never taught officially on Craig's sermon, so I might match what he said exactly. I might be completely different. We'll find out. So, let's start with 5 myths about the tithe that you may or may not believe. Leviticus 27 is where most of these sacrifices and offerings are described, and verses 30 to 33 describes the main tithe. It says, "All tithes from the land, whether the seed from the ground or the fruit of the tree, are the Lord's. They are holy to the Lord. If persons wish to redeem any of their tithes, they must add 1/5 to them. All tithes of herd and flock, every 10th one that passes under the shepherd's staff, shall be holy to the Lord. Let no one inquire whether it is good or bad to make substitutions for it. If one makes substitution for it, then both it and the substitute shall be holy and cannot be redeemed." So what do we see here? See crops from farming and animals from ranching. The first myth is that the tithe was entirely monetary, and here we plainly see that it was only farm and ranch produce. We see how the animal is chosen. They line up the animals that were born in the time of the tithe, time until the tithe. They have them pass under their crook. They count 1, 2, 3, and every 10th that passes, that's the one that goes. And then they start again if they still have more. But it seems like trades are entirely exempted. I don't know where winemaking comes in. I'm pretty sure the farmers did that themselves. But, carpentry, that type of thing, it's never mentioned. And a note, redeem here, it means like, as with a coupon or a banknote, it's exchanging what's meant to be tithed for monetary value. And so if you're basically selling it, for example, if you're not close enough to the temple to bring your animal there, you would trade it in for money and send that money plus an extra 20%. So 12% total. We can look at Leviticus 27:15 to describe the redemption there. It says, "And if the one who consecrates the house," it's talking about a different situation there, "wishes to redeem it, 1/5 shall be added to its assessed value, and it shall revert to the original owner," which is basically like you're buying back your own tithe. The second myth is that the tithe was given at the beginning of the harvest. So remember that every 10th, that requires that you have 10 animals born before you can even begin to tithe. And so you can't do that at the beginning. There's nothing to tithe yet. The same thing is true of the harvest. How can you tithe at the beginning of a harvest? You need to finish your harvest to know what 10% even is to tithe it. But then what of that first fruit situation? What is that about? Let's look at Exodus 23:19, which I didn't put in my notes. Just weird because it says, "The choices of the first fruits of your ground shall you bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk." That's unrelated. This specific situation is describing how you make a festival tithe. It's saying you're giving the best to celebrate with. You're not going to send your scrawniest little lamb to be the party animal. No, you're going to choose the best one. So that's not the actual first fruit. So let's look at instead Leviticus 23:9-14, which describes this actual law, which again I did not put in here. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the sheaf of the firstfruits of your harvest to the priest. You shall raise the sheaf before the Lord that you may find acceptance. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall raise it. On the day when you raise the sheaf, you shall offer a lamb a year old without blemish as a burnt offering to the Lord," and so on. This is an offering of faith. It is saying that you're trusting that God will bless you by giving away the best of your first stuff to the Levites. So the third myth, the tithe was exactly 10%. For crops, it seems easier today because we can just weigh it all. But they probably didn't use weight. They used a whole measure. I believe the measurement they would have used was a homer or an ephah or something. I don't forget which is the bigger one. But you can think of bales of hay. You'll fill a whole bale and then you'll be left with a little left over. You're not going to give that random little either sad bale or pile of straw you have left. You'll just count every 10 of those bales of hay and give one of them. And then remembering the animal counting is that it's every 10. So a little math question. If you have one lamb born to your flock, how many do you need to tithe? 0, because you don't have 10. You have 20 lambs born to your flock. That's a simple one. You have 2. But if you only have 19, we're not rounding up. We're not in the modern world. It's still just 1. You're not going to chop off the head and leave the 9/10 of a lamb. And then we need to remember that this is just one of the tithes. We mentioned the first fruits already, which is, I believe, described to be a tithe, at 10%. Deuteronomy 14:22-27 describes a festival tithe, and it says, because the Lord your God has blessed you so great. And what's special about that one is it's not being given away. God is saying, take 10% and have a party. He's basically justifying having a monthly expensive date.
That was not given to the Levites.
That one was not, which brings us to the third major tithe, which is every 3 years, a tithe is laid out in the town for the poor. Your widows, orphans, travelers, sojourners are also described. And that one also goes to the Levites. And I mean, what they do with it is up to them, but that's basically their version of the festival tithe because they don't have their own products to create a festival tithe to themselves. And that flows well into the fourth myth, which is that the poor Israelites tithed. If you don't have a farm, you don't have crops to tithe. If you don't have a ranch, there are no animals to tithe. And like we said, if you have less than 10 measures, you also don't have anything to tithe. So if you just have a small farm or a small ranch, no tithe. And finally, with that poor tithe mentioned, how are you supposed to tithe into your own pool that you're taking from? It just doesn't make sense. And the last one, this is certainly the most interesting because it is not from the law itself, that Abraham tithing before the law means we should tithe after it. The only record of Abraham tithing is with Melchizedek. It's in Genesis 14. It's after, I believe he goes to war for Melchizedek, and he gives Melchizedek 10% of those spoils. That was just a one-off thing, and that was entirely voluntary. We also see Jacob in Genesis 28 giving a different tithe. That one was just a free will offering. He was under no law to give that tithe, he just chose to. And they're not going to say he gave 9%, they're going to use whatever word they had, a tenth. So both these acts were voluntary, and if we tithe because of Abraham, burnt offerings shouldn't have ended either, because Abraham made many, many more burnt offerings than he did tithes. But we don't burn our animals. You're not going to sacrifice one of your horses, right, Tracy? So, what does the New Testament say? Well, the New Testament agrees with the Old Testament in a few ways. First is this principle: everything is God's. We see this in 1 Chronicles 29:14. But who am I, and what is my people, that we should be able to make this free will offering? For all things come from you, and of your own have we given you. Weird sentence. Exodus 19:5. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine. That is the Lord speaking. Matthew 25 has the parable of talents, which is, if you remember, 3 people given 110 and 1 talents, I believe, or 20, 10 and 1, and describes how 2 of them invested and gave back an interest, and one of them just buried the one, and describes a stewardship of the talents, the money that we are given. Titus 1:7, for a bishop as God's steward must be blameless. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or addicted to wine. That is the wrong. I should have had 1:17, I believe, which describes that a bishop should be a steward. 1 Peter 4:10, like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. There is special consideration for the poor, specifically in the church community. Not that we shouldn't help our neighbors, but it is notable that these specifications for the poor almost always seem to be within that faith community, whether it's the Israelites or within the church. So we have that poor tithe we just mentioned. It's a big one. We have the year of release described in Deuteronomy 15. And notably, you're still told to give, or the Israelites were still told to give, even as the year of release approached. So they would get almost nothing back from that giving because God commanded them to still give even a year before the year of release, as if they upheld to the year of release. We have the year of Jubilee described in Leviticus 25, every 50 or so years, or every 49 on the 50th or something like that. All debts are just completely erased. But Jeremiah's entire prophecy is that they didn't do any of that. They didn't do the Sabbath years, the year of rest for the farms, years of Jubilee. Probably didn't do the year of release either, because if they didn't do any of the others, why would they do the one? And as a result, they were kicked out of the land. So, fair warning.
Why did they not?
Probably greed. More reason do anyone? What better reason would they have to not give up their loans?
Yeah.
The most interesting accommodation for the poor in the Old Testament is gleaning, in my opinion, described in Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien, sojourner, traveler. I am the Lord your God. We're studying Ruth and quizzing, and one of the major points in that is Ruth gleaning off Boaz. And she is both a traveler and a foreigner. Legally, she is an alien to that land. And what's notable about this is just 8 verses later, you get to the love your neighbor passage. So it is the same passage as when we're told to love your neighbor as yourself. Then in the New Testament, Matthew 26:9, for this ointment could have been sold for a large sum, and the money given to the poor. This is when one lady pours rich perfume onto Jesus. And the disciples are like, why are you letting her do this? We could have sold that and given it to the poor, which implies they were giving money to the poor. Acts 2 and 4 describes distributions, looking at verses 44 through and 45 of chapter 2. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Then Acts 6:1. During those days, when the disciples were increasing in number, the Hellenists complained against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. They had soup kitchens.
But to your point, Liam, I think it's really good that that was first and foremost to the church. They were taking care of their own people, and as a result, other people came in. Their first thing was not doing soup kitchens like you see today. Out for whoever. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that is not what Christians are told to do. And if there's anybody in your church that's lacking, you have a responsibility there before anyone else.
Yes, that first and foremost we support the church, and then from there can support everyone else. Galatians 2, looking at verse 10, they asked only one thing, that we remember the poor, which is actually what I was eager to do, and this is Peter asking Paul to remember the poor. And he's saying, I was already going to do that, which I'd hope so. James 2, looking at verse 14 and onward. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Surely that faith cannot save, can it? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what good is that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Now remembering that the famous James 2:17 is about supporting those in need. 1 John 3:16 through 18, we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers and sisters. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need, and yet refuses to help? Little children, let us not love in word or speech, but in deed and truth. And the final one is the special consideration for our ministers and ministries, including missions. And if you think about it, ministry and missions are the same things, just different territories. So first, that original tithe in Leviticus goes to the Levites. They don't have land or farms. They have no way of supporting themselves. In exchange for their work in managing the sacrifices and all that. And then Paul notes a lot of these things himself in 1 Corinthians 9. I couldn't find the specific verse, but I remember he says, you've tried to give me a lot of money, and I said no, because you would hold it against me, or act like you own my work or something like that. And then Philippians' entire purpose is a thank you note to the Philippians. Looking at, I don't have the chapter here, I just have noted verse 15. You Philippians indeed know that in the early days of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you alone. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs more than once. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the profit that accumulates to your account. I have been paid in full and have more than enough. I am fully satisfied now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And my God will fully satisfy every need of yours according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. Chapter 4, yeah. I remember it being later on. No, there are some differences between the tithes and offerings of the Old Testament and the giving practices in the New Testament. And that specific description is notable. Giving is no longer codified. In the Old Testament, there were 14 offerings prescribed, most notable, and notably among them in Leviticus 22 and mentioned in 1 Chronicles 29 is a free will offering. Just give whatever you want. In the New Testament, it's as the Spirit leads. We see in Hebrews 7-10 the end of the sacrifices as a result of Jesus. And we see it being based on partnership with God. And Paul never says anything about tithe or a tenth or anything of that like. There's a focus on attitude, free will giving. In 2 Corinthians 9:6-8, that's probably your famous passage on this. The point is this: the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not regretfully or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver, and God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance, so that by always having enough of everything, you may share abundantly in every good work. We have notable phrases here: not regretfully or reluctantly, as most translations say, or under compulsion. We have that word bountifully, which is from the Greek phrase epivlokia, literally on good language. I don't know how that relates, but it's interesting. And then this phrase, so that by always having enough of everything, it starts with contentment. And the third difference is the wealthy giving liberally, well above a normal tithe. Notably, in the Old Testament, if the laws were followed properly, there wouldn't be any poor in the land. Obviously there were, and as Jeremiah notes, they were not doing everything they were supposed to. But in 1 Timothy 6:17-19, As for those who in the present age are rich, command them not to be haughty or to set up their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but rather on God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, generous, and ready to share, thus storing up for themselves treasures of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of the life that really is life. And again, we have that Acts 2:44 through 47, where everyone gave what they can and no one had need. So, we can finally get to the fun passage. Malachi 3. We all know it. Will anyone rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how are we robbing you? In your tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and thus put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts. See if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. I will rebuke the locust for you, so that it will not destroy the produce of your soil, and your vine in the field will not be barren, says the Lord of hosts. Then all nations will count you happy, for you will be a land of delight, says the Lord of hosts. So what of this? Why doesn't this apply? Looking at the whole of Malachi, this is targeting the whole nation of the Levites and the priests who are a subsect of the Levites, and targeting the whole sacrificial system which has been improperly managed. There's Malachi 1:6, 2:1, 3:10 notably. I'm not going to read them because there's a lot. But then there's the idea of the storehouse. So the priests didn't tithe. The Israelites tithed to the Levites, and the Levites, they weren't all priests. They themselves tithed of what was tithed to them, to the priests. And so when the Levites were tithed to, they would put their tithe into the storehouse so that it wouldn't go bad. Nehemiah 10:38, and the priest, the descendant of Aaron, shall be with the Levites when the Levites receive the tithes. And the Levites shall bring up a tithe of the tithes to the house of our God, to the chamber of the storehouse. We literally see the tithe of the tithe right there. And we see that the priests were to be overseers of that tithe. And then 2 Chronicles 31, verse 4, Hezekiah commanded the people who lived in Jerusalem to give the portion due to the priests and the Levites, so that they might devote themselves to the law of the Lord. This is right after abolishing paganism for the umpteenth time in Israel. And even if the whole of Israel were in scope, we'd be obligated to take the whole systems of tithes and offerings. And we see the curse language used in verse 9, which refers specifically to the laws. Looking at Galatians 3:10, for all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not observe and obey all the things written in the book of the law. But again, Jesus ended all that. And lastly, the tithe is a food product. The food was brought into my house, the temple, and notably their land specifications are made. So if you're not in the land, you're not tithing. Modern Jews still hold to that today. Since there is no temple, they don't tithe. So if even the modern Jews aren't tithing, why should we? They do have their own system, notably. To be a member of the synagogue, they need to buy a seat, which we briefly discussed. We're updating our constitution at Pine Grove. And I was thinking about this lesson as we were discussing it because we didn't fully eliminate needing to have given financially to the church to be a proper member. I'm still in the air on that, but it's just a point of consideration there.
That wouldn't be biblical though, because when you look at the gifts, everyone is supposed to bring their gift to the benefit of the church. Not everybody's a teacher. and not everybody gives, like Romans 12 says, contributing is one of the gifts, and that's never talked about in terms of gifts. If your gift is other thing, I mean, no, not everybody's expected to be a prophet or a teacher.
Oh, I agree. We'll get there. Yes. And notably, they would waive that seed buying at discretion. If they don't have the money to buy it, why would you make them? And free will offerings again. Oh boy. Finally, we'll summarize with 3 myths and 4 major keys. The first myth is that Christians are in debt to God. There is debt language used throughout the New Testament. It is almost always about sin. And again, we can look at 2 Corinthians 9. That there's no compulsion, and God is providing you with every blessing. And again, God owning everything. The second is that we need to pay for God's protection, whether it's financially or otherwise. That's just not scriptural. The idea that we need to pay for God's protection, whether it's financially or otherwise, that by tithing you're basically paying for God's protection, that you're ensuring good financial stability by tithing, it's just not anywhere in the Bible.
But that's what they preach, to get you to give them money.
And the final one is that your first 10% is a base, and anything above that is for benefits. That's prosperity gospel, which, we don't believe. Gifts of God cannot be purchased. Acts 8, verse 20, but Peter said to him, may your silver perish with you because you thought you could obtain God's gifts with money. Straight out of his mouth.
What was that verse?
Acts 8:20. And then Romans 12, verses 6 through 8. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the encourager in encouragement, the giver in sincerity, the leader in diligence, the compassion in cheerfulness. Contrasting that myth entirely, giving is itself a gift from God. And so if you don't have that gift, you shouldn't force it.
But then, same with all the gifts, does that mean we don't do some gifts? Do we not try? I mean, you should always be working at it.
Of course. And you might not know it's a gift until you do it. So, major takeaways. First, everything we have is God's. If, with that in mind, any amount of giving back, in whatever way you do it, I don't know. It almost makes it make more sense in how you give to understand that it's not yours to be giving in the first place.
James tells us in his book that therefore him who knows the good he ought to do, who doesn't do it, him becomes sin.
Mm-hmm.
And is giving back to God's work or helping somebody else, is that the good we ought to do? And if we don't do that, are we sinning? And then the end result is what happens when we sin? If we're not forgiven, we're lost.
Yeah. And I think looking at specific situations, like James himself calls out, if you see someone in need and you have the ability to help them and you don't, that is held against you.
But that's the key, if you have the ability, because it also says if you're not caring for your own family and household, you're worse than the worst sinner. So if you can't pay your bills, taking your money to the church is a sin.
Yeah.
I don't think you can ever outgive God. In my faith, my mother-in-law and father-in-law had many testimonies about when they were in the ministry during the Depression. And my father-in-law had $2 to go buy milk for the baby with my sister-in-law Elaine. And he went to a woman's house, the husband was away day trying to find work. She had 6 children and there was not one piece of food in the house. He gave her all he had, and they went home and they started praying. And the next day, occasionally people would send them $1 in the mail to help support them in ministry, friends that they knew and other believers. And this one time only, they sent them $2. And they asked later, why was it that you sent $2 that one time? They said, we never did. So God can provide for you. And you need to grow your faith by giving even when you don't think you can. Yes, you need to pay your bills, but you also don't need to get yourself so in debt with things you don't need.
Oh, exactly.
There is a rule there. As you sow, you reap.
Mhm.
And when I got my very first job, I asked my dad, well, Dad, am I supposed to tithe off of my gross or my net? And my dad says, well, you want gross blessings or net blessings? And so that's what I started at. It's just a way to get started. People say, oh, well, the Bible doesn't tell us to tithe. Well, it's a good little place to start because God will bless you beyond what you can imagine if you are just faithful with the little you get to start with.
Well, and following his leading and prompting, Sue, I'm sure God's Spirit guided him to give that money to that woman. And he listened to that.
He could go home and leave that woman with nothing for her.
Right.
His children.
Well, the greater command is to love our neighbor. I mean, love God, love our neighbor.
Mhm.
As yourself, how you show that, it's not about money, but money can be part of a way that we show that.
But they were not flush with money themselves. And being able to give their child dinner was kind of an important thing when they're a baby, So sometimes you do have to step out of faith, and sometimes you do need to give even if it hurts.
And if you seek God in that, he'll lead you. What to give, who to give to, how much to give.
You have to listen to that still small voice when he's trying to talk to you. And if you don't, it's going to get loud.
Yeah, which is one of the major takeaways. As we follow Jesus, we'll develop a mindset of generosity. And as the Spirit leads us to give, as we learn to follow the Spirit, giving will probably be a part of that. When we give financially, we should remember the biblical giving principles, supporting our ministers in ministry, including missions, and supporting the less fortunate, especially starting with your faith community. And finally, God works in the finances to teach his ways. In Luke 16:10-12, which is that the talents? Yes, that's the talents. We are stewards, and talent has this neat modern reinterpretation because we use that to refer to skills nowadays instead of a measure. And giving and using our talents, our skills, is equally as important as giving financially. Now, in certain ways, giving financially is maybe using your skills if your skills don't translate into your church, which you should probably think a little harder because I'm guessing most people's personal skills can be used in your church, your career skills, but if they truly can't, metal casting isn't really used in a church nowadays. We have several metal casters in our church. They have other skills too, and doing that heavy work gives you a fair amount of money, a surplus that you know you can give generously to the church, then so be it. So ultimately, You should encourage free giving in every category, whether it's monetarily or with your skills, with liberality and with joy. Remember to follow the Spirit, trust the Spirit. And if you're not feeling compelled to give, don't force it. But when you are, remember to follow through. And if 10% of every paycheck is comfortable for you, in a place that you feel that God is telling you to do every paycheck or every month, by all means. I'm not telling you not to give to your church. I am telling you to give to your church.
He might tell you to give 20%.
He might tell you to give 20%. Probably won't tell you to give 100%. Just doesn't work nowadays. Unless that church is fully communist, which I don't think any of our churches are doing. I think it could work for a church community. I don't think a lot of people would trust that personally.
This was a challenge to me, and I don't know what other people think, but you say if someone in your church had a need, financial need.
Mm-hmm.
In our world today, how many people have real financial needs? And what level is someone's afraid to ask for help?
Yeah.
Because they're too embarrassed to say, I
Mm-hmm.
need help. How do we make that more accessible and known to church members what is the right time to ask? Your thoughts, Liam?
Well, doing it in some way, a organized way within your church, to have a dedicated fund in your church for supporting those, that they can go privately to the elders and say, I need help, that money is available to be used. Or maybe your church just has a random surplus of money. Most of them probably do. If you're running negative, you're in trouble.
Fund in our church that's specifically for someone who has needs.
Mhm.
They can come to the elders and we,
Yeah.
let them know what their request is and what they need.
Yeah.
From those funds, we can help them.
And this creates a bit of an ironic problem where the common person might think, oh, our church isn't helping our church in need. They are, it's just not public because, first of all, Jesus says, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing, or whatever way it is. And also the shame aspect, that it makes sense. It's fair.
But I think it's important too to have people who are wise. If you have a prayer meeting and someone's saying, would you pray for me? I don't know how I'm gonna pay for my electricity this month. Might be nice if someone reached out to them,
Mm-hmm.
because people don't wanna ask.
Yeah.
And if we're sensitive to that, and if you see a need,
Mm-hmm.
like you quoted as well, I think we need to take the initiative sometime too.
What type of responsibility does the church have when a church member comes and asks for help, and then next month they come back again and ask for help? That person thinks that the church is a bank, and that becomes tough. The church has to say no.
It does. And on some level, it takes a lot of wisdom, and hopefully your elders have that kind of wisdom and are trusting God to, strongest example I can think of this of the Acts church is with Ananias and Sapphira. Granted, they were giving and just lied about what they gave, but there was still a dishonesty there, and I don't remember a specific point where they described someone who was maybe taking and wasn't actually in need. They probably did, because greedy people exist in every era of this world.
I think to that point too, Daryl, it says that if you don't work, you shouldn't eat.
Sure.
And so if the person is just laying around on the couch all day doing absolutely nothing, you have to be wise in your giving. But if it's a single mom who is working her butt off and can't meet the ends every month, maybe she has to come back more than once.
Mm.
If the person has, lake property and all these boats and jewels and they're just buying stuff like that, maybe they could sell some of that. I think to just look at things wisely as to who's asking. I don't think you'd set you can only come once or, we're gonna support you the rest of your life. And then to remember too, it says who uses their gift of ministry, their livelihood should come from that too. And so that too is important.
Yeah.
We had a lesson about this at church this last week, I guess it was the week before. And I was telling people I saw a car that had a license plate that said DUET, 818. I thought, gee, that's really strange, because I recognized it as a Bible verse. And it was something that had Mary Kay Cosmetics. And so when I got home, I looked it up and just like to read what it says. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gave you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirmed His covenant which He swore to you, your ancestors, as it is today. And the other thought I had was about Nebuchadnezzar. It said, look at what I've made here. And he ended up eating grass for 7 years. God controls your ability to make wealth. It's all His to start with. And He's just loaning it to you. So do it in a way that honors Him.
So John, you're gonna start selling Mary Kay?
I tried everything else.
And to a point Tracy said, ministers should be fully supported by their church. I mean, Paul was supported by most of his churches. Those that didn't provide, he either didn't want their money or they couldn't, and he accepted that. And
That was the exception you brought up where he said, I don't want to take any of your money, because he knew their hearts.
yeah, and there's an argument to be made that our churches should be able to fully to pay for our ministers, our pastors' full-time lives, including their families. And most of them have some level of side job. Now, if they want to work those side jobs, like menial tasks that help them think about ministry, I'm not going to stop them. But
I've been in the ministry 40 years, and in that 40 years, I've only had one church that was able to support me fully. And I don't know what it is with the Church of God, and I'm not bashing our denomination, but we have a lot of bivocational pastors. And it'd be nice if the church could support us full time. But I guess it comes down to education and letting, having the church be taught, not giving, and therefore might be able to support the pastor full time.
yeah,
I think the more that Paul even had a job, he was a tent maker. He talks about
Yeah.
And so he had a vocation or a side job, as well as getting money from people. So
I think that was specifically when he was in Corinth, so it's from the church that he wouldn't take money from.
Right.
But it is still true that Paul had.
Well, I think to Daryl's point, education is what's important. How often have you ever heard a sermon or a class in a church, and hopefully you'll be presenting your class there, or a sermon. The only thing I've ever heard in a church is tithing. Preaching tithing, give the tithe, God's gonna bless you. Trust God, and that's all you hear. You don't hear anything that you just shared with us today, so thank you.
Any other questions or random thoughts you've had? I don't have many great personal stories about having given and received back tenfold. I can say that for periods of when I tithed, I did feel the most financially secure, but I also had zero expenses at that stage of life, so I had no reason to have any financial insecurity. I was living with my parents. And now I have a mortgage and granted, a full-time working wife, but entering a very different stage of life.
I think it's one way to learn to trust God. It's not the only way. And I think he uses that in teaching us things about generosity, teaching us to trust God. There may be times when he calls you to give your last $2, but that's not every week.
No.
Now you'd be under a bridge.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just real life. And yes, God can provide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we need to be faithful with what we've been given. Ask yourself, what have I been given?
Mm-hmm.
And it might not be money. It might be time.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are a lot of elderly people, they don't have a lot of money, but they got a lot of time and they're prayer warriors. And if you don't have that, you still can't do what you do.
And for some of us, we're working 8 hours and then you have multiple kids at home. Your time is more valuable spent with them. That your money is the best thing for you to give to your church. And if you can't give to your church because you need that money to raise your kids, God bless you in that.
Yeah, how many people make excuses for that? Like, I can't give. I want to spend it somewhere else. I want to do other things. That's a shame that, like you said, the education part. How do we educate people enough? And are we afraid to speak about it too much? And I think we are.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be able to speak about it more.
Yeah.
And sharing the stories like Sue sharing food and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What's that?
And sharing the stories like Sue shared with Brother Black.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we were at the Fredericktown Church and there was a young adult class that being taught and I think there was 3 or 4 couples, they were all fairly new Christians and they taught about that and pretty much he aligned a lot with the tithe was in the Old Testament, but that's where you can start, and if you want to. And I know there was at least one couple, they ran a lumber company, and they were just like, we just don't know how we can do that. She was really skeptical, but they started, and she just, I remember Diane sharing so much what a blessing it was, and how they felt so blessed afterwards, and so many things that changed in their lives, and they started.
And that's trusting, it's giving, like you said. It's not just because it was a tithe.
Right.
But people preach that and you think, I gave the 10%, and look at what happened.
Yeah.
And
They just, they thought they were not going to be able to make it because she had just never, I think she'd grown up Methodist or something. Anyway, that was just a whole new concept to her. And I think, it wasn't just they stuck at 10%. I think it came over the butt.
But I think
she
it's
was
that
amazing how
attitude.
God blessed her. Yeah.
And it's not about giving to, quote, the church like people think of the organization. It's the people.
Mm-hmm.
They brought it in and it said every person was taken care of. It didn't say that, the church building was paid for or whatever else. It's about the people in the ministry, and today buildings are part of that. But I think the people are what that's going to, and praying what you want it to go to, God. Seeking God's guidance. He may have you personally go give it to somebody in the church that you know is in need, instead of putting it in the offering plate.
Mm-hmm. And
kind of sum up in my head is that in like a grand view, we should have it on our hearts to give and know that it's God's money and all that. But given that we aren't under the law, we don't know by specifics of how to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
which is the entire evolution from the law to the Spirit-led church.
The
And
only time you hear a sermon on giving is when the pastor was a rake.
It's true.
Or it's when you're not keeping the light bill, for a while.
Yeah. And I mentioned I stopped tithing. Instead of giving the money, buying stuff for the ministries I have, which for me right now is Parents' Night Out, a monthly or bi-monthly childcare date night for the parents. The kids think it's for the kids, but and I buy something instead of giving money to church, buying something, submitting the receipt to church, and getting money back. I just buy it, and then also men's breakfast monthly. Sometimes I get money back from usually Bill, almost always Bill. But I don't count cash money in my wallet as money I have, so.
So one thing you might want to address is, as we look at the individual church, how do we look at state conference and stuff like that, and national work? They all need to operate, and they're all doing Lord's work. I know that Minnesota State Conference struggles financially. Been blessed with some of the upgrades on this campground where a small group of people have put in fairly large amounts of money in order to see it kept up. And one of the things that I was going to bring up at the board meeting is people like Thomas Towers and stuff like that. They asked me for like $11 a month or $20 a month. And if you break that down, $20 a month is 5 days, $5 a week, which is less than $1 a day. And something like that, if everybody did just that, I'm sure that there's times when we, I don't want to say wasted, but spent money that we could support the conference. And that would go a long way to help.
And I think the important thing with that and with your church and any ministry is knowing what they are being invested in, what they're doing, because, I mean, you're not just going to throw money at a random charity because it's a charity. You're going to support it because you believe in what they're doing. And for that, attending those meetings, knowing what they're doing to know whether you believe in that ministry, whether you believe the Spirit's leading you to give to that ministry. That type of thing is quite important. That's why being connected is important in that matter. And the same thing goes for, your church, your state missions, your national and international missions. Knowing who, what, and where things are to know where needs are. Because everywhere needs support. And
I think that's it, putting the needs out, and when people hear of them, if you share a need today, maybe I don't have money today, but if you keep sharing that need, maybe next week God speaks to me, oh, you've got money here, give to that.
mm-hmm.
And so making the needs aware, and trust that God will lay on the hearts of the people to get those things done if it's His work.
Yeah, because like Sarah brought up recently that one of our African churches had their Bible stolen. That's a need that needs to be filled. That'll probably be brought up at the mission meeting today. But that's the type of thing where knowing it, hearing that, and going, holy moly, those Bibles are expensive. Do they not have cheaper ways of printing Bibles these days? But we have the most expensive Bibles in our pockets nowadays, so.
And most of those people in those countries have those same pocket Bibles.
Especially the ones stealing those Bibles, so. No.
I think you hit on it too, Liam, that it's important to know what the ministry's doing. Are they preaching truth? Are they teaching the gospel of the kingdom that Jesus taught? Are they preaching what Jesus did in Matthew 28? He said, go to the nations and teach them to obey everything I said. Are they doing that? If they're not doing that, you shouldn't be giving your money to it. You're supporting something that is not biblical. There's plenty out there that is. And I think you need to do your research and not just give, like you said, to any charity or whatever you hear. It may tug at your hearts, but if it's not biblical, there are other places that you have to be a good steward with your money. And so if you're giving there, you can't give to say maybe what your church is doing for outreach. Which you would hope they're preaching truth if you're going to a church.
Pray that the Spirit will guide you to give and tell you where to give.